The beeping was the first sound I registered. Not voices, not footsteps, just that steady mechanical pulse cutting through the dark like something insisting I stay. I didn't know where I was. I knew I was lying down. I knew there was something taped to the back of my hand. I knew the light above me was too white, too flat, and that my chest felt like someone had parked a car on it overnight. And then a nurse leaned over me and said, "Mrs. Caldwell, you're okay, you're at St. Joseph's." St. Joseph's? I'd driven past that hospital 100 times on my way to the grocery store. Never imagined I'd wake up inside it. She told me I'd collapsed. She said I'd been unconscious when the paramedics arrived. She said I'd gone into cardiac arrest in the parking lot, and that the defibrillator had brought me back. She said all of this very calmly, the way people do when they've said it many times before, and I just lay there with the oxygen tube under my nose trying to understand that I had actually died, briefly on a Tuesday morning in the parking lot of my church. I'm 67 years old. I retired 2 years ago after 31 years of teaching middle school English in Dayton, Ohio. I live alone in the house my late husband and I bought in 1989. I have a garden that I'm proud of. I have a Tuesday morning Bible study group that I've attended for 11 years. I have a son named Garrett. I want to tell you about Garrett. But first I need to tell you what happened in that hospital, because that's where this story really begins. The doctor came in about an hour after I woke up. He was a younger man, kind face, the kind of tired that comes from working nights. He pulled a chair up beside my bed, which told me he wasn't going to rush this. He said my heart had been under significant stress. He said the blockage was serious enough that I'd need surgery, not immediately, but within the next 48 hours. He said I'd be staying at St. Joseph's for at least 5 days, possibly longer. Then he paused and looked at his clipboard, and something in his expression shifted. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "is there someone we can call? A family member who should be here with you?" I gave him Garrett's number. My son. 38 years old, lives 40 minutes away in Columbus, works in sales, has a wife named Jenna and 2 kids I see at Christmas if I'm lucky. The doctor nodded and said they'd reach him right away. I closed my eyes. 40 minutes wasn't far. He'd be here before dinner. We'd figure this out together. I fell asleep thinking that. What I didn't know, what nobody told me until 3 days later, was that they hadn't reached Garrett with one phone call. They had tried 29 times. 29 calls over the course of 6 hours from 3 different hospital numbers, and my son did not pick up a single one. I didn't find that out in the hospital room. I found it out from a woman named Addie Fraser. She's 63 years old. She lives 2 houses down from me, and she has been my neighbor for 16 years. We share a fence. We wave at each other in the driveway. Last Thanksgiving she brought over half a pecan pie because she'd made too much and didn't want it to go to waste. That's the kind of person she is. Addie had seen the ambulance. She'd been leaving for work when she noticed it parked in front of the church. Lights going. She didn't know it was me until her daughter, who works at the hospital in admissions, called her that afternoon and mentioned my name. Addie came to St. Joseph's that same evening. She sat with me for 4 hours. She held my hand through the parts of the doctor's explanation I couldn't follow. She wrote everything down in a little notebook she'd brought, every medication name, every question to ask, every follow-up appointment. She went home at 10, came back at 7 the next morning with a change of clothes and a container of homemade soup, and she stayed. She never once said, "Have you heard from Garrett?" I noticed that. I asked her on the second day. I said, "Did the hospital get in touch with my son?" She took a breath. "Just a small one, but I saw it." "I think they tried," she said. How many times? She looked at me very steadily. 29. I didn't say anything. I lay there and I looked at the ceiling and I did the arithmetic. 29 calls, 6 hours. My son was 40 minutes away. And then, because some part of me still needed to believe there was an explanation, I said maybe something happened. Maybe he and Jenna Lorraine, that's my name. Lorraine, Addie said it the way you say someone's name when you want them to stop. Gently, firmly, like a hand on a shoulder. I know. You know what? She picked up her phone. She turned it toward me. It was Garrett's Facebook page, a photo he'd posted the morning after I collapsed. He was standing on a dock. Blue water behind him, sky so clear it almost hurt to look at. He was holding up a fish and laughing, and Jenna was standing beside him in a sundress, and both kids were squinting into the sun. The caption said, "Family fishing trip, no phones, no problems, living our best life." No phones. He hadn't forgotten to answer. He had made a decision. I handed Addie her phone back. I pulled my blanket up. I turned toward the window and I looked at the parking lot below. And I thought about all the times I had called Garrett first. Every birthday. Every holiday. Every time I wanted to hear my grandchildren's voices. I thought about the last time I'd visited Columbus and Jenna had spent the whole weekend making excuses for why they couldn't do dinner, and Garrett had looked at me across the kitchen island with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not guilt, exactly, not annoyance, exactly, just a kind of blankness, like I was someone he was waiting to be done with. I had told myself I was imagining it. I had told myself family goes through phases. I had told myself a lot of things. The surgery happened on Thursday. Addie sat in the waiting room for 4 hours by herself. When the doctor came out to tell her everything had gone well, she cried. She told me about it afterward, a little embarrassed, dabbing at her eyes with a paper towel. She said, I was so relieved. And I thought, this woman, who is not my family, who owes me absolutely nothing, sat alone in a plastic chair for 4 hours and cried with relief when I survived. I came home on Sunday. Garrett called on Monday, not 29 times. Once, at 11:14 in the morning, while I was sitting in my recliner with a heating pad and a cup of tea. I looked at his name on the screen for a long moment. I picked up, Mum. His voice was cautious. He knew. I just heard. Jenna's sister told her. Are you okay? Jenna's sister. Not the hospital, not a doctor. His wife's sister had mentioned it in passing, probably, over the weekend. The way you mentioned something you assumed everyone already knew. I'm fine, I said. I'm home. Why didn't you call me? I set my tea down. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. It wasn't rage. I was past rage. It was something quieter and colder, like a door closing very softly in a house you're leaving for the last time. The hospital called you 29 times, I said, while I was having surgery, while I was in a coma. 29 times, Garrett. Silence. I was on a trip, Mum. We had a plan. I know. I saw the photo. More silence. He said he was sorry. He said it the way people say it when they're hoping it will end the conversation, not the way people say it when they mean it. He said he'd come see me that weekend. He said he hoped I was feeling better. I said, sure, take care of yourself. And I hung up. He did not come that weekend. Addie came every day that first week. She sat with me while I did my breathing exercises. She drove me to my follow-up appointment because I wasn't cleared to drive yet. She brought groceries without being asked, just left them on the porch with a note. Didn't want to wake you. Soup in the blue container. Heat it up for lunch. She pruned back the rose bushes along my fence because she said the dead growth was bothering her and she couldn't stand to look at it anymore, and I sat on my porch steps and watched her work and thought, this is what love actually looks like. Not the word, the action. Her daughter Simone started stopping by too. She's 35, works in medical billing, sharp as a tack. She helped me sort through the insurance paperwork, which was a disaster. 3 different bills, 2 of them wrong, one of them nearly $4,000 more than it should have been. Simone caught it. She made the calls. She spent 2 afternoons on hold with the insurance company and got it corrected. Nobody asked her to do that. I had been thinking about my will for a while. My husband, rest his soul, passed in 2018, and after that I updated everything to leave the house and our savings to Garrett. The house appraised at around $310,000 2 years ago. I had a retirement account and some savings. Total, somewhere around $199,000. Everything was going to him. I called my attorney about 3 weeks after I came home from the hospital. Her name is Rose, and I've worked with her for years. I told her I needed to come in and talk through some changes. She didn't ask questions. She just said, Thursday at 2. I told Addie I was going. Not why. She just nodded and said she'd drive me. In Rose's office, I sat across the big oak desk, and I told her the whole story. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I appreciate about her. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk and said, "What would you like to do?" I told her. Garrett was not removed entirely. I'm his mother. That didn't disappear when he failed to answer the phone, but the house I planted the garden in, the house his father carried me across the threshold of, the house I have spent 35 years making into something, that is going to Addie. I've set up a trust. There are conditions, but she'll have it. A portion of the savings is going to Simone, for reasons I don't think I need to explain. A portion is going to my church, which has meant more to me in the last year than I can say, and yes, Garrett is in the will. He'll receive an amount that is honest but not lavish, enough to know I didn't forget him, not enough to know he was the priority. Rose looked up from her notepad when I finished and said, "Are you at peace with this?" I thought about it. Really thought about it, the way you do when someone asks a question that deserves an actual answer. "Yes," I said, "I think I am." I won't pretend a weeks after were simple. I had moments of doubt. I lay awake some nights wondering if I was being too hard, if I was letting bitterness make a permanent decision. I thought about Garrett as a little boy. I thought about his first day of school and how he'd cried at the bus stop, and how I'd cried the whole drive home. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway, and how proud he'd been when he finally got it. I thought about all of it, and then I thought about 29 calls. I thought about a fishing photo on a Tuesday afternoon. I thought about I just heard. I thought about Addie in a waiting room by herself, crying with relief, and I stayed the course. Garrett showed up in October, unannounced, a Sunday afternoon, knocked on my door like he hadn't been absent for months. He looked older, I noticed, a little tired around the eyes. He had flowers, tulips, the yellow ones I'd always liked. I let him in. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table the way we used to, and for a while we just talked about ordinary things. His kids. My garden. The neighbour down the street who'd put up an enormous Halloween display that frankly I found excessive. And then he said, "Mom, I know things were bad this summer. I want to make them right." I looked at him across the table. My son. My boy. The one I raised and worried over and prayed for every single night for 38 years. Garrett, I said, I love you. I'll always love you. Nothing changes that. He nodded, relieved. But love doesn't fix everything, I said. It doesn't undo what happened, and I think we both know that a lot needs to change before I can trust the way things were. He was quiet for a long time. I let him be quiet. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Finally, he said, Did you change the will? There it was. Not, are you okay? Not, what do you need from me? Not, Mum, I'm sorry I wasn't there. Did you change the will? I looked at him. I thought about Rose's office. I thought about Addie pruning roses in October, because she didn't want me to have to do it. I thought about 29 calls ringing into nothing. We don't need to talk about that today, I said. He left an hour later. We hugged at the door. It was real. The hug, that part was real. He is still my son. That hasn't gone anywhere. But I watched his car pull out of the driveway, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Relief. Addie came by that evening. She didn't know he'd been there. She just came by because she'd made a pot of chili, and it was too cold not to share. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Garrett and I had just been, and we ate chili with cornbread, and she told me about a documentary she'd been watching about people who moved to Portugal in their 60s, which apparently is a whole thing now, and we laughed about whether we could actually do something like that. I don't speak Portuguese, I said. You could learn, she said. Maybe, I thought. Maybe I could. I have a follow-up cardiology appointment next month. The doctor says my numbers are good. He says if I keep up the diet and the gentle exercise and cut out the stress, his word, I should have plenty of years ahead of me. I intend to use them. I've started writing again. I used to write years ago before teaching took everything I had, just small things. Observations. Memories. Things I didn't want to forget. I've been sitting at the desk in the back bedroom every morning before the house gets too warm, and I write. About my garden, about my husband, about the way the light comes in through the hospital window at 6 in the morning and makes everything look like it might be all right. About what it means to be rescued by someone who wasn't obligated to rescue you. I think about that a lot, the obligation piece. We assume family is the bedrock, the people who will always show up, always answer, always sit in the waiting room. We build our lives around that assumption. We make our wills around it. We spend decades maintaining those relationships with such careful effort, bending ourselves into shapes that don't always fit, because we believe the obligation is mutual. But it isn't always, and the thing I've learned, at 67, after a cardiac arrest in a church parking lot on a Tuesday morning, is this. The people who actually show up don't do it out of obligation. They do it because they want to. That's the difference. That's the whole thing right there. Addie didn't come to that hospital because she had to. She came because she looked at me and thought, someone should be there. She came because she is, at her core, someone who shows up. That has nothing to do with blood or paperwork or 35 years of shared history. It has everything to do with character. I keep the hospital bracelet in the little dish on my bathroom counter next to my watch and my late husband's wedding ring. I don't know why. Maybe as a reminder. Maybe because there's something in me that doesn't want to forget what it felt like to wake up and not know if anyone was coming, and what it felt like to find out that someone already was. My garden is in good shape, better than it's been in a few years, honestly, because Addie has a gift for it, and she's been helping me since I couldn't kneel down without getting winded. The roses are going to be spectacular in the spring. She picked out a new variety, a deep coral, almost red, and we planted them along the back fence in October. She said they'd need time to establish before their first bloom. Worth the wait, she said, patting the soil back into place. I stood there in the November light, hands in my pockets, watching her work, and I thought, yes. Some things are. I don't know what happens next with Garrett. I hope he finds his way back, not to the will, not to what he thinks he might be missing, but to the version of himself that I know is in there somewhere. The boy who cried at the bus stop. The one who called me every Sunday in college just to talk. That person exists. I've seen him, but I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not arranging my life around the hope that he'll change. I'm 67 years old, and my heart has already failed once, and I don't have the energy to keep a light on for someone who isn't looking for it. I have a neighbor who brings chili in November and talks about Portugal and cries in waiting rooms. I have a Tuesday morning Bible study group who sent so many casseroles I had to call the pastor and ask him to please, kindly, slow the casseroles down. I have a garden that's going to bloom coral red in the spring. I have enough. I've been thinking a lot lately about what we build our lives around, the assumptions we make so early and so completely that we stop seeing them as assumptions at all. I built mine around the idea that family shows up. Not perfectly, not without inconvenience, but shows up. That was the foundation I didn't question for 67 years. And then I woke up in a hospital bed and found out the foundation had a crack I'd been stepping around for years without knowing it. What happened to me wasn't random. I don't mean the cardiac arrest. That was biology, bad luck, a body doing what bodies eventually do. I mean everything after. The 29 unanswered calls. The fishing photo. The Sunday visit with tulips and a question about the will, dressed up as concern. None of that was random. It was the result of a long series of small choices that Garrett made, and a long series of small choices I made too. The ones where I noticed something was off, and told myself I was imagining it. Where I called first, always. Where I bent myself into a shape that was easier for him to deal with and called it keeping the peace. We teach our children by what we tolerate as much as by what we say. I taught Garrett without meaning to that I would always be there and that he didn't have to be. That's a hard thing to sit with. I'm sitting with it anyway, because I think honesty about our own part in things is what separates wisdom from bitterness. I don't want to be bitter. Bitterness is just pain that stopped moving. What I keep coming back to is Addie, not what she did, though what she did was extraordinary. But why? She didn't come to that hospital because she calculated that it would benefit her. She didn't stay because she expected anything in return. She came because she looked at a situation and thought, this is wrong and I can help, so I will. That's it. That's the whole of her motivation as far as I can tell. And that kind of character, the kind that acts right when no one is requiring it, that's not luck. That's something a person builds in themselves, quietly, over a lifetime of small decisions that nobody applauds. I think about that when I think about what I want the rest of my life to look like. Not just who I want around me, but who I want to be. Whether I'm the kind of person who shows up, whether I'm building that in myself the same way Addie did, the way Simone did, without fanfare. Changing the will wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, at least to myself. It was an honest accounting. It was me finally letting what I knew to be true match what I'd put on paper. Garrett will receive something. He's my son. But the house, the 35 years of living and loving that happened inside those walls, that belongs somewhere it will be cared for. That's not punishment. That's just clarity. The hardest kind of wisdom is the kind that costs you something. This cost me the version of my future I'd always imagined, the one where my son and I grew closer as I got older, where he was the one I called in an emergency. I'm grieving that version. I think I'll be grieving it for a while. But grief and regret aren't the same thing. I regret the years I spent not seeing clearly. I don't regret seeing clearly now. The coral roses are going to bloom in the spring. Addie picked them out. I'll be here to see them.